We have now completed the first 2 days of the 2024 MLB Draft, and the Orioles so far have scooped up a lot of talent. And today, we're going to get to know some of that talent. Coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, July 15th, 2024, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to take a look back at the Orioles' first 11 picks here in the 2024 MLB Draft. Rounds 1 through 10, we're going to get a nice little look back on, including specifically Vance Honeycutt, the Orioles' first-round pick. And Daron Vaught is going to join us, who covers ACC baseball in a fantastic podcast where he breaks everything down from the conference. He is going to join us to talk about the Orioles' top 3 picks, and then I'll give us a breakdown of rounds 3 through 10 at the end of the show. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. So we're going to jump right into it here fairly quickly, as we have an interview on the top of today's podcast. And our guest is Daron Vaught. He does a lot of things in the broadcast and college baseball world, but that is including being the co-host of ACC Baseball Etc, a great podcast that covers the Atlantic Coast Conference in baseball. And that makes him the perfect person to talk about the Orioles' top 3 picks in this year's draft. Vance Honeycutt, an outfielder out of North Carolina, Griff O'Ferrall, a shortstop out of Virginia, and Ethan Anderson, a catcher out of Virginia as well. So Daron is going to join us now to talk about those 3 players and what they could bring to the Orioles. So our guest on today's show is back again. He is Daron Vaught. He is an expert on everything ACC baseball and etc. ACC Baseball Etc is his podcast that you can listen to. He's also play-by-play voice of USA Baseball. He just knows a lot about the guys we're going to talk about today. And Daron, first of all, welcome back onto the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Connor. Always good to be with you. It seems like kind of an annual thing. The O's like ACC players, so why not? Let's go.
And you can see why. There's a lot of talent in that conference, as we know. And let's start with the big fish that the Orioles picked up with the number 22 pick in the first round of the MLB Draft on Sunday night. They go with Vance Honeycutt. And I thought Vance Honeycutt was a really interesting pick because he felt like one of the more well-known by the kind of general public picks in the first round. And I think that's because everything he did in the NCAA tournament this year, including with a walk-off in Omaha. So that's just where I wanted to start. Like, he is not the best player in this draft. You can see why he went at 22, but he seems to be one of the more well-known guys because, I mean, he might have risen to the moment better than any other player, at least in the ACC and maybe in the country at times this year.
Yeah, so if you buy into clutch as a concept, he's probably one of the more clutch guys in this draft. I think part of it too, Connor, is that he's well known because of what he could be and how good he could be. This is a guy who hit for a lot of pop at North Carolina. He is their career home run record holder now. He steals a lot of bases as well. He's fast. He's a dynamic athlete. He was twice the Defensive Player of the Year in the ACC. He's the type of guy that I don't think this is an exaggeration. If he was to fly through the O's system and be an everyday or close to everyday outfield piece for them, in 2 years, he could be winning an AL Gold Glove award. Now, the hang up with him continues to be, and this is what makes him such a controversial pick in the first round, his swing and miss rate. It is a fact. It is not hyperbole. It is a fact that in the first round, he is the college baseball player taken with a first-round draft pick with the highest swing and miss ever for a career. It typically, guys of that profile with that high of a percentage of swing and miss do not pan out the way that scouts, executives would like for them to. I think worst case scenario, it's like a Kevin Kiermaier, who of course is a defensive dynamo who had flashes offensively, or maybe even like a Jackie Bradley Jr., who was very streaky with the bat, but so streaky, in fact, that on the way to a World Series with the Red Sox in 2018, he was the ALCS MVP, right? So you can envision a scenario where, and the Orioles system is as good as any at this. You get Vance Honeycutt, you have one mission: solve the swing and miss. If you can do that, the sky's the limit for this guy, and he's maybe a double-digit all-star player by the time we're done talking about him.
Yeah, and the swing and miss, like the stats back it up, as you mentioned. 27% strikeout rate is the highest of anyone in the first round. And you look at that, you say, okay, there's good major leaguers with 27% strikeout rates, but you got to extrapolate it out in that he's going to be facing much better pitching, with much better breaking balls as he gets to the big leagues, and you have to think it's going to go up. Baseball America had a great piece earlier this week kind of comparing him to the other guys who had strikeout rates that high, and he was the highest. But they said there were 13 players since 2012 who had a 20% or more strikeout rate in college, and it's still gone in the first round. Now, the guy with the second highest K rate was, funny enough, Kyler Murray, who obviously decided not to play baseball and take another route in his career. But it was interesting looking at the other guys, because you have guys like Michael Toglia, who's having like the weirdest year in the big leagues this year, where all he does is strike out or hit a home run. You know, he's basically Joey Gallo light. You've got guys like Trevor Larnach and Joey Bart, who have been kind of up and down in the big leagues because the strikeouts are just too much. But then the name that's very interesting in there is also Jordan Westburg, who the Orioles drafted with a high strikeout rate and have turned him into an all-star this year in his first full season in the big league. So it's kind of like, if anyone's going to make it work, it's going to be the Orioles. And that's something you talked about as well. Like, yes, the strikeouts are an issue, but when he's making contact, like, this is a serious hitter who is doing some serious damage. As you mentioned, the home run leader, he hit 318 this year. He slugged 714. He had 28 home runs on the season. I mean, his OPS was over 1100. So this is a guy who, when he is making contact, that's not the issue they got to worry about right now.
Yeah. So to that point, if it is a pitcher who has like one thing that ails them, right? Who am I probably going to feel best about them going into that organization? It's going to be like the Dodgers, the Rays. If it's a hitter and it happens to be an outfielder who may or may not fit this trend of a meme of a trend of a lot of Orioles system guys kind of looking like each other, and he kind of slips right into that pattern, I feel pretty good about Baltimore's system getting him up to speed in that regard. And Westburg's a great example. A guy who was maybe not as controversial of a pick when he came out. But part of it too for Vance is again, just the attention that he's garnered with rising to the moment. And I can just say from having covered Vance a lot over the past few years, his heart rate is always steady. He hardly cares about accolades that he got this season. And it's wild because he got tons of them, right? I mean, he's the home run king for North Carolina, and that's a record that had stood for almost 40 years. He played in Omaha, and it's just, he's a team first kind of guy who will put moments of individual success aside. If he does well, that's great, as long as it is in favor of the team. So I think, honestly, I think O's fans are going to love him. He's going to be awesome. He's so much fun to watch in the outfield in particular. And then don't get me started on if he gets on base and he can steal second, he can steal third. The guy has had a green light basically his entire college career. And I would imagine that was the same for him as a senior in high school, a junior in high school. I don't know when the last time he actually got a signal to steal was, but he's stolen a lot of bags since then.
I mean, and that's the other reason why you look at a guy, you're saying, okay, he's striking out that much in college. How can he possibly be going 22? Well, the floor is so high because you look at him patrol center field and run the bases, and you're like, if we put him out there right now in the big leagues, he might help a big league team right now because he's so good out there. Yeah.
Defensive runs saved 2 consecutive seasons. He was tops in the ACC. And we're talking, depending on which formula you look at for the season, he's like 15 defensive runs saved for a season in center field. And that's a big, big number. So yeah, I mean, that's the difference between a guy like maybe him and Westberg coming out, is that the strikeout rate can make it look like a guy is feast or famine at the plate, but he saves for a lot of that, because if he does walk, if he does, knock a ground ball through the infield and he gets on, he's very dangerous on the base paths. And then there's the added value defensively too, right? So it's risky as a hitter, but not as risky as you might think, because the game is that complete around that.
So we'll get back to our conversation with Daron in just a moment. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. With hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival's city. Now, I feel like Orioles and Rangers could be developing into a little bit of a rivalry, and that is where the Orioles go coming out of the All-Star break this Friday. And hey, maybe you're down checking out the All-Star festivities in Texas. We'll just stay right there for the rest of the week, and you can see Orioles Rangers in that rival city. They got hotels that look over stadiums, family-friendly resorts. Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. And the right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or in the Booking.com app. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Supply House. Order supplies from the website that's made for the skilled trades. Find thousands of parts from hundreds of brands in just a couple clicks at supplyhouse.com. Supplyhouse.com gives you 24/7 access to a huge selection of plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with fast delivery anywhere in the U.S. Need help with an order? Get industry-leading after-sales service from their friendly and knowledgeable customer support team and talk to a real person every time. And there's great news for plumbers, technicians, and contractors. Being a pro has its perks. Trade industry professionals can join their free Trade Master program for free shipping and serious discounts on every order. Over 100,000 pros already trust the Trade Master program to deliver results. Apply for your membership today and get a competitive edge on every order at supplyhouse.com/TM. Save money and time when you order online. Order plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies from supplyhouse.com. Real people, real service. So I wanted to move on to the Orioles' second and third picks in the draft on Sunday on day one. They had a prospect promotion pick from Gunnar Henderson winning Rookie of the Year, and then they had their second round pick. And initially I had reached out just to chat about Honeycutt, but of course the Orioles took two more ACC players that we can talk about a bit here. So let's talk about, I mean, it's even better to have you on because Griff O'Ferrall, who the Orioles took at 32 overall, junior shortstop out of Virginia, who is kind of like offensively the exact opposite profile as Vance Honeycutt. He doesn't strike out, but he also doesn't hit for power. You know, his 5 homers this year, I believe, were a career high for O'Ferrall. Like, I think he hit 1 home run last year, but he is also a really strong defender at shortstop. And you guys had him on your show just earlier this week, I believe, or last week. And so what does he bring? Because I think Orioles fans were like, okay, they went with the high variance guy, and then they kind of felt like, okay, did we go with the safe guy with the second pick? Kind of what does he bring to the table?
Yeah, he's safe in a lot of ways. He is a steady presence at the plate. He's going to make contact. He's a tremendous defender up the middle. He and a guy, Henry Godbout, who's still got some eligibility left with Virginia, were maybe the best middle infield in all of college baseball that I saw this year defensively. So O'Farrell's really good with the glove. Offensively, and we talked about this on the show, actually. He said when he went to the combine, basically the main thing with him is that he's too good with the barrel and getting the bat on the ball to not get deep into counts as much as he did, because he doesn't strike out a lot, but he also doesn't walk a lot. It's because he can make contact with so much. There's not much that is around the zone that doesn't look like a good pitch to him. So he's kind of got to get more picky is his understanding as he develops into a professional. And with that, I think the quality of hit is going to come, right? He's a very smart guy, obviously UVA, but it's a good pick. It's solid. I would say you're right on with, it's a safer pick, but it kind of fits for the Orioles.
Yeah, this is not a comp, but if you're thinking what kind of player, like you're thinking a Luis Arraez type player, where it's like he's not getting deep in counts because as soon as the ball's in the strike zone, it is swing mode and it is contact mode and the ball is in play, and he's got a little speed which he can use to help himself get on base as well. I mean, he hit 325 this season, and it was with 5 homers. As I mentioned, he had an 824 OPS. His best season was last year because, I mean, you look at the stats and you're like, 1 home run. Okay, what does that do for us? But he hit 20 doubles and hit 396 as a sophomore. And we know that the college numbers the last couple of years have certainly been inflated, but it wasn't really power numbers, which has been the number one thing most inflated across baseball. It's a guy hitting 396, and that's still going to pop even if only 1 ball went over the fence. And that allows you to dream like, okay, we don't have to work on the bat to ball skills because they're right there. Like he's shown it time and time again against the best pitching in the country.
Yeah. And again, if anything, you'd like to maybe see him strike out a little bit more because he's trying to be choosier with his pitches and figure out, okay, what are those pitches I can put into the gaps and get multiple bases off of. And, you know, you mentioned that 1 home run last year as a sophomore. I don't think that came until maybe it was a regional or a super regional. I mean, it was way late in the year. So there's plenty to unlock with Griff for sure. And, you know, I will draw a parallel between he and Vance. You mentioned the comp between Kyler Murray and Vance Honeycutt. Vance at Salisbury High School in North Carolina, star quarterback as a prep. Griff O'Ferrall, football player, quarterback as a prep. There's a pattern here with the multi-sport athletes. And I think typically with guys like that, because Griff wasn't in the club baseball circuit that much. He really played in 1 event that got him noticed by Virginia. Otherwise, it's not like he was traveling with a Canes National or somebody like that and being seen all over the place because he was busy playing other sports. Whenever you get a guy like that, I think it's encouraging to a major league organization in the same way that, you know, maybe 10 years ago, you would lean toward the younger player, get the guy out of high school. I think organizations now are seeing the multi-sport guys who really sort of specifically chose baseball going into college or maybe while they were in college, and seeing that as an opportunity to, okay, we're going to grow this athlete in this one sport purview. Because they haven't really done that in their lives. And Griff had a teammate, Jay Woolfolk at Virginia, who did that and you know, had started some games at quarterback for Virginia before, you know, just becoming a pitcher for the baseball team. So I think there's some value there too that I'm maybe drawing a false parallel, but you know, maybe Baltimore sees something in guys like that.
It's certainly a lot that could be looking at. And the one thing we do know, though, to kind of finish up here, the O's had a lot of scouts in Charlottesville this year. I mean, you got to imagine they had scouts in Charlottesville because they go with Griff O'Ferrall and then immediately they turn back to the Cavaliers and they take Ethan Anderson, who was a super interesting pick. A switch-hitting catcher is what he's announced as, and that is his position. But he barely got to catch because – you know, fans may know the name Kyle Teal. He was just casually a top 10 pick last year. And so there were 2 years where Kyle Teal was on that team. And then Virginia brought in a grad transfer catcher this year who kind of took that starting role. So Anderson was like a first base DH. And I know he was first team all ACC as a utility guy this year. I mean, he hit 331. He had a 943 OPS. He hit 375 with an 1100 OPS last year when he kind of hit for a little more power in 2023 for the Cavaliers. But I think the question everyone has is like, can he catch? That might be a tough question for you. I know you may have seen a little bit in Team USA, but nobody's really seen him do it. It's like all these private workouts that scouts went to see him catch because you can't see him in games. So I just want to get your thoughts mostly on his bat because that's what we've seen. But if you've heard anything about like, is he still a catcher despite not getting the chance at Virginia?
Yeah, I think a couple of things go into him catching fewer games this year. Entering the season, it was like, okay, Teal is out of the way. Anderson's going to be the team's everyday catcher. Well, then you get to the beginning of the season and he scuffles at the plate a little bit. And I think their head coach, Brian O'Connor, wanted to sort of clear his head a little bit and free him up to be able to hit it some. And knowing that they had the grad transfer, they put a guy, Jacob Ferentz is his name, into that spot. And then Ferentz got a hot bat. So then it becomes an issue of, okay, how do I keep them both in the lineup? And it was less of an issue of Anderson not being able to play the position and more just sort of a circumstantial thing where, again, they were trying to get him out of a slump toward the beginning of the year. It turned out to be something that worked. Anderson is capable at other positions. He can be in the outfield. He could play first base and DH as he did. I think the potential to catch is still there. I would imagine if he's going to, the swing looks way better from the left-handed side. I'll say that. I don't know if it's on the table to limit him and become left-handed hitting exclusive. If he's going to continue to focus on being a switch hitter, like we've seen in the past, I mean, that's essentially double the time working on hitting. I'm not sure if it is maybe in his best interest to stay focused on being a catcher, if that is still the case. I just think that's a lot of moving parts and a lot to work on, a lot of works in progress. But it's doable, certainly. And, again, maybe you got to pick one before the other. But Anderson could catch. I don't know if that's the intent. If I'm Baltimore, I think more than likely I try to develop him as a first baseman or a corner outfielder, or maybe somebody who can do a little bit of both. And who knows? I mean, there exists such a utility guy in Major League Baseball that is a catcher / first baseman / corner outfielder. So there's some value there. And again, the Orioles are great at identifying value and finding it and maximizing it. So maybe that's what they're thinking with Anderson, but it's a good bat, really good line drive hitter. Can tend to get a little bit long with the swing from the right-handed side is kind of my view on it. I like it a lot better from the left side. But he's good. I mean, the numbers are there from both sides of the plate. So he's a good pick.
Yeah, catcher, first base, outfield, utility guy. Well, David Fry is in the All-Star game this year, so it's certainly possible for it to happen. Daron, thank you so much for joining us. The Orioles just made this real easy to recap their first 3 picks, all in the same conference, all ACC guys, all guys who played in Omaha this year as well, which means a lot of fans probably a little more used to seeing them out there on the field. Before we go, let everybody know where they can find your podcast, where they can hear you talking baseball.
Yeah, so the Twitter, which you've got here, is a good starting point. ACC Baseball Etc is part of the D1 Baseball Podcast Network, so you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Danny Graves and I are the main 2 on that, and we'll welcome guests and have all kinds of fun throughout the season. This is kind of the fun time of the year. The word etc does a lot of heavy lifting this time of year. Now that the college season is over, Danny still covers a lot of big league stuff. So we like to think of it, especially during the summer months, as just generally a baseball podcast. So yeah, come one, come all.
So coming up next, we will run through the picks in rounds 3 through 10 for the Orioles on Monday, day 2 of the draft. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is an official ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. And with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. I've done it before. They have these last-minute deals at Game Time. You can save up to 60% buying last-minute Orioles tickets. I've done it right on Utah Street, right outside the gates. I go on the Game Time app. I buy a ticket for super cheap. It goes right to the Game Time app on my phone, and I just scan it on the app through the gate and into Camden Yards. It's really that simple. And you can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB. That is LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by the DK Law Group. The DK Law Group is a Maryland-based law firm who is redefining the legal process with their modern approach. DK Law Group specializes in real estate law, estate planning, business law, and family law. They're tech savvy, they treat their clients like family, and they focus on keeping your legal solutions simple. And the DK Law Group is a women-led firm with Diana Kahn at the helm. Diana has been called an unparalleled legal expert. So contact DK Law Group today at dklawmd.com. And Locked On Orioles listeners can call today to schedule a free 30-minute consultation when you mention the tagline, Empowering Legacies. So our thanks again to Daron Vaught for joining the podcast once again. Always great chatting with him. Wanted to finish out this episode, just kind of a speed round of all of the Orioles' Day 2 picks. Those were rounds 3 through 10 here in the draft this season. And we started off with their third round pick. And this was a guy who was very interesting. It is outfield Austin Overn, a 21-year-old left-handed hitting center fielder from USC. Now, Overn is a younger guy, a draft-eligible sophomore, which meaning he only spent 2 years at USC, but because of his age was still eligible for the draft. Hit .270 this year with a .349 on base and .810 OPS. He had 8 home runs on the season and ended up stealing 17 bases as well. That was after hitting .314 with a .932 OPS last year. Some have said he's got speed up to 80 grade speed. That's a little debatable, but either way, it is blazing speed in the outfield. An incredible defender in center. Now, 643's Charts, which does a great job of doing college baseball analytics, they put out a ranking of defensive runs saved for outfielders in Division I college baseball in the 2023 season. Let me know if you recognize the top 3 of defensive runs saved last year. Number 1, Enrique Bradfield Jr., number 2, Austin Overn, and number 3 was Vance Honeycutt. Yeah, the Orioles have got some really good outfield defenders in their system. Got some pop from the left side, and Joe Doyle called him, quote, a super tooled up kid. 4th round selection for the O's, pick number 127. They take their first pitcher of the draft, and that is right-handed pitcher Chase Alsop out of Auburn. Now they go with another Auburn pitcher. They took Trace Bright a couple of years ago, 21-year-old righty who spent 3 years pitching at Auburn. He was mostly a relief pitcher for his first 2 years, but the Tigers moved him into the starting rotation this season, where he did have a 5.63 ERA in 62 and a third innings, but he posted a 27% strikeout rate to just a 6% walk rate. He cut his walks almost by a third this season, which was really, really impressive from the right-hander. It's a fastball up to 90, or a fastball at 96. He can run it up to 100. He's got a slider and a changeup and a little bit of a curveball in the mix as well. Really a high-velocity guy who, if the Orioles can turn into a starter, could have some huge upside. Joe Doyle called him potentially a riser to go on the first day, and the Orioles get him on day 2. 5th round selection by the Orioles, pick number 160. They go with a catcher, and that catcher is Ryan Stafford, 3-year catcher at 21 years old out of Cal Poly out on the West Coast. Really good defensive catcher, and he's got some skills with the bat. I mean, this guy hit .368 this year with a .1012 OPS, only 6 homers, but did have 23 doubles on the season. Now, he didn't walk a whole lot, but really didn't strike out much either, which was really nice to see. He had his best offensive season to go along with good defensive skill sets. And that is after he was a freshman All-American back in 2022 for Cal Poly. That is how good his first season was, when he had a .324 batting average that year and played a really good catcher behind the plate. So a nice option for the Orioles to add to their catchers in the system. Round 6, pick number 189. The Orioles went with their first and only high school pick so far in the draft. 17-year-old switch-hitting shortstop DJ Layton, Derek Layton, but goes by DJ. Originally from South Carolina, but drafted out of Charlotte Christian High School in North Carolina. Joe Doyle says he's got the skills, good defensive shortstop, projectable from both sides of the plate as a hitter. Also said he's been up to 94 miles per hour on the mound as a right-handed pitcher. Now, the Orioles drafted Leighton as a shortstop, but just something to monitor if they want to try anything two-way for the high schooler. 7th round pick for the Orioles, pick number 219. They go to another pitcher. It is the left-hander Carson Dorsey, a 21-year-old lefty out of Florida State. O's have had some success picking pitchers out of Florida State with Jackson Bowmeister last year. Now, it was his only year at Florida State. He spent 2 years at the junior college ranks, one of the best pitchers in all of junior college the last 2 years at Gulf Coast State College, transferred to Florida State, and continued to have a good amount of success. Now, he bounced in and out of the rotation and the bullpen. At the end of the year, he threw 76 1/3 innings with a 4.60 ERA, also had 3 saves. Good strikeout rate. Walks were a little bit high for the left-hander, but seems to be very, very projectable on the mound. It's a fastball up to 94. He's got a 12-6 curveball and a slider. And Joe Doyle from Future Stars series saying, quote, "The metrics really sing on his stuff." Yeah, and you know that is why the Orioles went after him. In the 8th round, pick number 249, the Orioles went with their second catcher of the draft, but this guy may not be a catcher only. The selection was Colin Tuft, the catcher and outfielder out of Tulane. Now, his main position at Tulane this year was catcher, and he hit .279, had a .946 OPS, slugged 12 home runs after only hitting 1 home run in each of his last 2 seasons. So that was really nice to see out of him. He spent his first 2 years at Virginia as kind of a left fielder / catcher. So you know the Orioles have been in Charlottesville for the last couple of years doing some scouting. But he goes to Tulane. Joe Doyle actually did not even have Tuft listed in his top 615 draft prospects for this year. Orioles again take him with the 249th pick, but he went to the Cape Cod League this summer, which is where some of the best players go during the summer. It is a wood bat league. It is the #1 wood bat league in the nation. And while he hasn't put up the best stats, he's hitting only 143 in the Cape this year. He's been playing mostly center field. He's been catching some, but playing a lot of center field. And when he's played outfield, at least at Virginia, he was mostly a left fielder. But the fact that he can catch and play center field and had such an offensive breakout this year makes him a super intriguing prospect. And I'm really excited to see him start his time in the Orioles system. 9th round pick at pick number 279 is another pitcher, right-handed pitcher Jack Crowder out of Illinois, 21-year-old right-hander for the Illini, who does turn 22 next week and was one of the older players that the Orioles selected. He pitched 4 years at Illinois in the Big Ten, but hey, put up some solid stats and has some solid stuff as well. The right-hander as a weekend starter this year, a 4.88 ERA in 90 innings on the season. Not a huge strikeout guy, but not a big walk guy either on the year. Seems to be the Orioles are liking some projectable stuff, a fastball in the low 90s to go along with a slider and a changeup. Also, though, not ranked in Joe Doyle's top 615. And the final selection by the Orioles on day 2 was their 10th round pick, a right-handed pitcher out of Cal State Fullerton named Christian Rodriguez. Another guy, this was pretty interesting. Joe Doyle, we've had him on this podcast many a times. He is my go-to guy in terms of draft content. The Orioles' final 3 selections, including Rodriguez, were not ranked in his top 615. Rodriguez, as a weekend starter for Cal State Fullerton this year, had a 5.45 ERA. Now, he was coming off of injury, got injured in the middle of the 2022 season as a starter for the Titans, then missed all of 2023. He came back, and in 69 innings, yes, it was a 5.45 ERA, but pretty low walk rate, not a whole lot of strikeouts for him. But you have to think what the Orioles see is, okay, maybe he still wasn't 100% at times this year, and maybe they're taking a look at the stuff and saying, okay, this right-hander could project once he gets fully healthy. Remember, this guy kind of reminds me of Nestor Herman, who the Orioles took out of Seattle University in, I believe, the 11th round last year. It was like nobody had heard of him, and now he's pitching pretty well in the Orioles system. So maybe Christian Rodriguez can be that guy. But that'll do it for the Orioles picks 3 through 10 in the rounds of the MLB draft. One more day of the draft coming up on Tuesday, rounds 11 through 20. I will be back on Tuesday evening, giving you something to know on all 10 picks the Orioles make on the final day of the draft, and updating you if the O's have made any undrafted free agent signings. We'll talk a bit about Gunnar Henderson's place in the home run derby. Hopefully, we're talking about a W. And we'll chat a little bit about the All-Star game, Corbin Burnes being named the starter in the American League. That is pretty cool to see. And any other Orioles news and notes from Tuesday. That is, again, an evening podcast coming up similar to this one on Tuesday evening. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.